Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy, and I'm a corporate sellout who likes to think of herself as a corporate innovator. And I think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck, even though a lot of my career, sometimes I've thought it has. And by statistics, they show that up to 80% of the workforce is dissatisfied at work and can lack engagement. And this is a huge cost to companies in the US. The paradox here is that folks are expecting to get more and more out of work. They're expecting work to create their meaning and the purpose in their lives. They're basing their identity on these roles. And with the pandemic and the great resignation, all of this has forced us to take a look at the quality of life and what culture really means for people inside of organizations. I always like to say, I think that building businesses is a really cool thing for the people who actually get there. It's fantastic. It's a great way to use our human potential to really create companies that solve real world problems. I just feel like a lot of potential is lost right inside of these organizations. So we talk about these topics on Work Dope. And in this episode, I speak with Marlene Chism, who is a consultant and an author. She is full of wisdom on aspects of human interaction and communication and avoiding communication, which often happens in the workspace. She deals with workplace drama and toxicity and so much more. We talk about how Marlene transitioned from factory job to leadership expert and author, the discomfort that risk and growth required. We talk about better leadership training and how to become a really great leader. And what do you do as a subordinate when your leadership just isn't that great? We talk about micromanagement, how it becomes the MO, where it comes from. We talk about being able to ask for what you want, no matter where you are in the organization at work. We talk about how to give feedback. Marlene has a fantastic, much more effective way than the quote unquote shit sandwich that sometimes is talked about. And she models how it can work. Hers is called the performance conversation model. So I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed talking with Marlene. Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, good. I am really excited to have you today. A thought partner, an advisor, and a coach, Marlene helps leaders through periods of transition or change. Marlene teaches leadership development courses that teach leaders strategic communication skills to initiate conversations and get results and increase accountability. Marlene is the author of 4 books, including Stop Workplace Drama, No Drama Leadership, 7 Ways to Stop Drama in Your Healthcare Practice, and her most recent one that we'll talk about a bit today, From Conflict to Courage, How to Stop Avoiding and Start Leading. Marlene is an expert on the LinkedIn Learning platform, and you can find a handful of courses there. Fantastic subjects like anger management, difficult conversations for managers, and working with high conflict people as a manager. Marlene has a degree in communications from Drury University and a master's degree in human resources development from Webster University, and she's an advanced practitioner in narrative coaching. I met Marlene through a series of introductions within a business coaching environment that we're both members of. I've been thrilled to have a couple of conversations in the past with you on various projects we've been working on. And Marlene, I know this is going to be a really rich conversation. I welcome you. And I'd ask, is there anything that you would add to that background, the fantastic history that you bring to us?
No, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about leadership. I'm going to be, of course, asking questions as it can relate to self-leadership, like from subordinates, like how do you kind of get the best out of your concepts if you're not necessarily the leader. We'll talk about workplace drama, because that's interesting. And we all have issues around that. And I also want to even touch a little bit on toxicity in the workplace. But before we do any of that, I really like to highlight with guests the fluidity of careers. I think sometimes people early in their career don't get that there's likely going to be a lot of change. And your background is so unique. And you spent 21 years in manufacturing as a factory worker, right? And then transitioned into professional speaking, training, consult. I would really love for you to tell me about that transition between the 21 years in factory. And I think your first step was to move into professional speaking. Am I right?
It was. If almost everybody goes through some sort of I call it the 3 life tragedies. We get to a place, whether it's in your mid 30s, mid 40s, or even earlier, if you've had a career for a while, there comes a time where you say to yourself, is this all there is?
Mm.
What else is there? What do other people do? And if you haven't had that exposure, it's a pretty scary feeling, especially if you're unhappy where you are. So I call that the 3 life tragedies. And the first tragedy is, you know, you want something more, but you don't know what it is.
Mm.
And people feel pretty ashamed about that sometimes.
Mm.
And yet there's really no shame in it. You know, you want something more, but you haven't defined it yet. So that's the first tragedy.
Mm.
The second tragedy is, you know what you want, and you know what you want, but you don't believe what you want is possible. Either you don't think you're smart enough, you don't think you have the education, it'll take too long, you're too old, there's some reason where you know what you want, but you don't believe that it's possible.
Mm.
The third one is, you know what you want, you believe it's possible, but then you have to be willing to jump, to take that
Mm.
risk.
Mm-hmm.
So I started from that first life tragedy of, I want something more, but all I've done is work in this building, in these 4 walls, so to speak, by the same people every single day,
Mm-hmm.
doing the same thing, from packing cheese to stacking a skid to driving a forklift to tearing down equipment for sanitation.
Mm.
And I jokingly say the best part of your day is when you look up at the clock and you realize it's time to rotate. So
Mm.
I knew nothing about the outside world, the business world. I had no idea what other people did. So this is your discovery phase, when you
Mhm.
go out and you start trying to discover. So what I did was, I went back to school. I started going to Toastmasters. Excuse me. I started going to Toastmasters, and that's when I said, I love to speak. And I used to do that in high school, and
Mm.
even competing.
Mhm.
And then I finally came up with, I think I might want to be a professional speaker. And I didn't know much about it, but that was that second phase. And that's where you're developing yourself. So you've
Mhm.
done discovery, now you're developing, you're working on the skills. And then I finally decided to jump, and that's where you start to deliver. That's
Mm.
that third tragedy of when you're willing to take the risk. And it was absolutely terrifying. And I really kind of started behind the 8 ball with my age and my lack of business experience, but I just decided to go for it. So, you know, I guess for anybody that's feeling bad about not knowing, or they're in development mode, just trust the process. It's just, I can say that now, but I can say, I wish I would have had a mentor to
Mm.
just say, it's okay where you are. You don't
Mhm.
have to be anything other than what you are, and it will feel very scary and you'll
Mhm.
compare yourself, but there
Mm.
is a process to all of this.
Yeah, and so the scary for you, was it a financial scary? You're clearly doing things you'd never done before. Like, describe the scary.
It was everything.
Mm.
So financially, yes, because I had, I guess, delusions about how easy it might be to make money. Because if you book a couple of speaking engagements back in the days when people really got paid, even for local engagements, which has totally changed in the last 20 years, but that seemed like a lot of money for not much work.
Mm.
But it takes a lot to create a business from it. So yes, financially, we cut our blue collar income in half, but
Mm.
also my self-worth
Mm.
was scary, because I started then comparing myself to people who were already 10 years in advance of me, or people who knew what they wanted to do. And at the age of 35 and 40, they had significant careers, making
Mhm.
a lot of money, having a lot of success. And I'm a beginner. So
Mhm.
it threatened my sense of self, which is a whole other story. And we can go into that if you want. But my
Mhm.
self worth was at stake. And
Mhm.
financially, yes. And the realization of how much more I have to learn, and that it's not a one and done. It is a
Mhm.
lifetime of practice. So yeah,
Mhm.
I had a lot of fears, and just, I was uncomfortable. In fact, one of my mantras that I used to use in the beginning was, when it comes to growth, comfort is not a requirement. I just
Right.
kept repeating that over and over.
Isn't it? It's like, I feel like it's true that discomfort is a requirement. I feel
Yes.
like you have to be uncomfortable if you want to grow, or you have to accept the discomfort in it. And so I'm kind of curious, because your narrative speaks to the move from manufacturing to entrepreneurship. And you've worked in a lot of organizations with human beings that, may have had other kinds of transitions, but stayed within a job, right? I mean,
Yes.
so have you seen these 3 tragedies occur as people shift but stay in, for, what are they, W-2 jobs?
Not as severely, to
Mm.
be truthful. There's
Yep.
still a sense of longing. I think the more you want something completely different, the more you're going to experience these 3 different levels,
Mm-hmm.
I believe you'll still experience a longing and a desire, but real big advancement takes pretty big risk,
Yeah.
depending on where you are, right? So it's not as much of a risk to take a different job in the same organization or to even elevate into a leadership role. It seems scary, but and just like myself, it's scary what I did, but it's not near as scary as the person from China who came over here with $5 in their pocket and couldn't
Right.
speak English. Like that
Right.
fear, I don't know, right? So it's
Right.
all in context of where
Right.
you are and what you want.
Right. Right. So relative. Yes, indeed. So I want to talk, shifting a little bit over to leadership and the concepts, some of which we talked about, I don't know, about 18 months ago. And when we spoke, you were reflecting that, a lot of people end up in leadership positions and they have some kind of, maybe they're technically really good or something, but there's no plan in place. And I want to read an excerpt from what you have at your website. You've got part of your most recent book there for people to go and consume. But this particular excerpt I really appreciated. You said the least experienced leaders scored high on both competence and capabilities. For example, new supervisors in manufacturing, construction, healthcare, or education often overestimated their ability to manage conflict. Instead of avoiding, they were overly aggressive. They would say, you would say a little drunk with power. All leaders have the desire to be good leaders, but they often lacked specific skills to have conversations in a way that inspired or motivated employees.
Yes.
And when we did talk, you kind of highlighted like what could be a nice plan if you really were going to approach leadership from zero to whatever, never ends, I'm sure, the growth. But what would you sketch out on the ideal situation for a brand new leader?
Oh, wow. There's so many pathways, but one thing that I tell new leaders is to start developing yourself and start identifying as a leader. In other words, define what leadership would mean to you, and then look at what leadership would mean to the organization, because that's going to be really important. If you have this belief that, well, we're all friends and they'll have my back and it'll be okay and we're all adults, you're in for a rude awakening. Because as a leader, you'll have to do things that you didn't think about. You'll have to have conversations with people you really like, and the conversations will be difficult. And there's times you have to deliver bad news that has nothing to do with what you would decide, but you still have to align with the executive decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's things you have to do. So you have to start to identify as a leader and understand what leadership means. And then I would just say, mentor with someone, learn what a good leader is in a particular situation or in a particular organization. So there's a lot of different methods and pathways, but the first part of it is to really get clear about what leadership means in that organization and what's going to be expected of you and what skills you lack, because you will have to do things that are emotionally very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And if folks don't have a lot of support inside of their organization, I think you speak to this in the book, but they're going to seek guidance outside of the organization, right?
Well, and the LinkedIn Learning is
Mm-hmm.
one area where people can join that for a
Mm-hmm.
pretty minimum fee every
Yeah.
month. And you can start learning different skill sets and ways of thinking. The
Mm-hmm.
kicker, though, is that while we might understand something and even be able to pass a test or
Yeah.
get a certification,
Yeah.
it's like the cow eats the cabbage when you have to really do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it really boils down to, do you really know it or do you just understand theory?
Yeah.
So learn as much as you can, start reading leadership books, mentor with
Mm-hmm.
other people, join groups, do what you can, because the truth is you're going to need that development, whether it's offered to you or not.
Mm-hmm. Do you have recommendations for where to find a mentor? I mean, I think my first thought is professional associations, get to know people, maybe people who are further along the path than you. What recommendations do you have there?
That's an interesting question, because in a way, until you're faced with leadership, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So in a way, it's not even relevant yet.
Yeah.
So I would say that build friendships, ask questions, read books. There's nothing worse than having to take a course in how to have difficult conversations when you don't have any difficulties right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not interesting.
Yeah.
It's only interesting when you are thrown into leadership. So
Right.
that's the paradox of all of it.
Yeah.
So I think just learn how to interview and ask questions, and really mentoring relationships, they have to be very clear on what's expected. What are we
Mm-hmm.
doing? What are you giving me? What am I giving you in return? And I think we often lack the clarity in what that looks like.
Yeah.
But if you can ask questions and interview different people, like what's the one tip you have for being a good leader, or how do you define
Mm-hmm.
leadership, or
Yeah.
what's been the scariest thing that you had to learn? Just learning to
Mm-hmm.
be curious is going to be a huge skill.
Yeah. I mean, I align this. I am not a parent, but no one can really prepare you until you have that newborn child, right?
Well, and truly, there's nobody that has any better advice than the person who's never had kids, right? Because
Oh, absolutely.
I'm that person too. I can always see things and think, wow, I've got the answer for that. But the truth is, when you're in a situation, it's different because there's
Right.
different emotions that
Right.
are not felt from a coaching or watching perspective.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah, we all have ideas for other people, but the hardest lessons are the ones we're in. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you do pick a mentor, pick someone who's at least had some experience that you've had
Mm-hmm.
emotionally or technically. But I would say you can learn the technical skills. It's the emotional, the people skills, the human skills that are the most difficult of
Right.
leadership.
Right. Absolutely. When you said, that the people who have no experience are the ones that'll give you the most
The
advice,
most advice.
it makes me think of people in subordinate positions in organizations. A lot of times have lots of opinions about how and what leadership is up to. Um, and it really, it's like they might only have a very small fraction of the picture of what's actually happening.
Well, that's right. That's why I think that it's always symbiotic.
Mm,
If you're judging or criticizing someone else that you work with, you have to look in the mirror.
yeah.
How can I make them better? How do
Yeah.
I do some of those things and don't realize it? Are there parts and pieces of their job that I don't understand?
Yeah.
Because it's harder than it looks. It
Mm-hmm.
looks a certain way, but when you're in it, it's
Yeah.
different. So I would
Mm-hmm.
just say to anyone that's kind of hard on their boss,
Yeah.
be curious about what else they're up against.
Yep, absolutely. That does move into my next thought around self leadership. So, this is really where I feel that organizations would be so much better off. I don't know, Pollyanna-ish of me, but to
No,
to teach everyone in the organization what leadership looks like. And you teach strategic communication skills, right? And we talk about an ideal quote unquote plan for leaders. But what about folks that just don't have great leaders, or maybe their leaders have even been offered all of this fantastic coaching and guidance, but it's just not taking? So what is the role of subordinates? You actually, even in the book, I love this quote: our teachers also show up as the boss we can't stand, the complaining coworker who drains our energy, the employee that won't engage, and the person who has difficult political viewpoint. I mean, anyone in the organization, front lines all the way up, can experience these things. So what's the advice for folks on the front lines?
it's take full responsibility for your experience.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that there's not things that are happening that are wrong or unfair. But if there's one thing I would advise for everybody from subordinate to the top leader is take full responsibility for your experience.
yeah.
And what that means is that you can't expect someone else to make you fulfilled or happy, but what you can do is speak up, ask for what you want, set boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
complain in a way that's helpful so that you are part of the solution instead of just a judge sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So part of good leadership is really about taking responsibility. In fact, my eighth chapter,
Mm-hmm.
I went back and forth on what to call that chapter, but I call it responsibility, the recognition of choice. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to call it leaving the victim mindset, but I
Yeah.
thought that would give the wrong message
Yeah.
because I know there are victims in life and I know
Mm-hmm.
someone can be victimized. So I don't mean it in that perspective, but what I mean
Yeah.
is that until you see a choice, you can't actually be responsible. If all you're doing is pointing at your system, your circumstances, your government, your leader, your
Yeah.
organization, then you know what? You have choices.
Yeah.
And responsibility is the recognition of choice.
Yes. Yes. And I've struggled with this with coworkers and just people in my life that really, I do believe that getting clear on what you want, you have to be able to make small requests in professional ways and, express yourself. But I have found that sometimes people that are in this mindset maybe have never had the opportunity to formulate that request or understand what it is, or they're just really afraid to say it because no matter how I try to ask for that, it just doesn't come out. Have you had this experience
Oh
or?
yeah, one of the biggest things that I teach in some of the workshops and communication skills training is the ability to ask for what you want. And if all you're doing is complaining about what didn't happen, what might not happen, what wasn't fair,
Yeah.
that's a lack of focus. So
Yeah.
the visual that I use is a rowboat in the left-hand corner of it, like a flip chart or a PowerPoint, an island at the upper right-hand corner, and then in the middle is a shark. The shark is the barrier. So drama is any obstacle to peace or prosperity. So the island represents peace and prosperity. In other words, what do I want? Me in the boat represents where I am now. So if I don't exactly know what's happening that should not be happening, and I'm just unhappy and I'm blaming and carrying on and being a drama king or queen, then I'm not helping the situation. But if I can say, okay, here's what's happening that should not be happening, and here's what I want, I at least now have clarity in how to present my case. And what happens for leaders is, even if they understand this, let's say that they're trying to coach someone, but in the conversation, it goes to verbal ping pong. Well, that's not fair. Well, I didn't say that. No, you did. No, I knew you would say that. Ping pong, ping pong. We've lost focus when we're into those kind of conversations, which is happening all over social media right now, by the way. We don't even know how to focus on an issue without it stringing out over 18 other related issues. So what you need to do is get clear on what is it that you want. And the truth is, most people do not know what they want. They know what they don't want, but they do not know what they want.
Yeah, I see this as a major issue. I mean, I feel like I suffered from it for most of my life. And I think it's part of how I grew up anyway. I don't know if it's changing. I'd like to think that it is, but I think that I grew up with kind of a passive mindset that was taught to me that life happens to you and you go along with things. And I don't think it's helping any of us.
And I do think, I believe I was taught that too. And that's why I think I stayed where I did for so long, because you're younger than me, but I grew up with Cinderella and the Glass Slipper. And I'm not saying I still love Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. I'm not against anything like that. But the point being that when you grow up believing that the Prince Charming will come, the fairy godmother will arrive, the slipper will fit, you're waiting to be discovered and acknowledged versus believing in yourself, understanding there will be trials, but that you're going to grow and have this learning mindset. So the best thing we can do to help our employees, to help ourselves, is to really have this learning mindset and focus on empowerment. And empowerment is about responsibility. And so I break that down into 3 different ways to gain responsibility. And first is the recognition of choice. Secondly, it is the choosing. And third, it's the accepting of the consequence of the choice. That's the only way you can be responsible, is to actually see the choice first. If you don't see it, it's as if it doesn't exist, and you stay in the factory for 45 years, you got a nice retirement, but you never knew there were other choices because you were too afraid to take a different risk, because your upbringing said, get the gold watch, learn different jobs within that little container, but that's what choices are.
Yeah, I have not researched this, but I do think about the fact that my folks were born during World War II, right? And so their parents, having gone through the Depression the way that they did, I just think that, of course, it's going to leave a mark, a really big mark, and that the safety in jobs. And anyway, that's like a whole other conversation, but I do think it definitely leads to this, really just that safety and there is something to it. I mean, I like having a steady income. It's a foundational need. So there are so many questions that spring from this, but one thing I read that is somewhat related here, that sometimes when folks are managing up, they might be relying on appeasing their superiors instead of actually maybe engaging. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, when I started doing this work, what occurred to me was avoidance. That was the big thing. And that's why that's in the title, How to Stop Avoiding and Start Leading. And what I saw in organizations was that every big problem that happened, to the extent of creating a lawsuit, could be rooted back to a conversation that should have happened but didn't. So I started thinking more about avoidance. And then I came up with the 3 A's: avoiding, appeasing, and aggression. So appeasing is still avoidance. It's another way to avoid without it being called avoidance. In other words, I'll wink and say it's a great idea when I just wanted you to be happy. I didn't think it was a great idea, but I don't feel the courage to say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure this idea is going to work given where we're going strategically. I didn't want you to be upset. So I told you it was a great idea. And I told you we'll talk about it next quarter at the quarterly meeting. And when the next quarterly meeting comes, you're there hoping that you're going to get your place in the sun. I've forgotten all about it because I was just appeasing. So
Mm-hmm.
people do that all the time to each other at a colleague level, going downward, like if you're over a team of people, and even upward, like my boss. I'm going to appease my boss. I'm going to tell them everything is fine. I'm
Right.
going to tell them no worries. I've got this handled. That's a form of avoidance to make someone happy because you're afraid of their reaction.
Right. Right. And so when people decide that they're going to act differently, this is a bold move, perhaps why the word courage is in your title. How then can that look when you really decide to do it or to act, to behave differently?
Well, the first part of it is the awareness that you're doing that, because
Yeah.
most people don't. Now, people that avoid and they avoid conflict and they procrastinate and they put it off, most people that would classify themselves as avoiders absolutely know they avoid. They know they avoid. I
Okay.
avoid, I hate it, conflict scares me, I'm not good at it, so
Mhm.
therefore I put it off. But
Mhm.
appeasers and avoiders can have this process as well. It's not just avoidant. They don't come in 3 cans, but like we can have all 3 of them. But what I'm saying is the act of appeasing, until we recognize that as avoidance, we're going to think it's just being nice.
Mhm.
So we have to first have the awareness of, when have I made a promise that I didn't keep? When
Mhm.
do I say it's a good idea when it's not? When
Mhm.
do I say I'd love to meet you for lunch next week on Tuesday, and then I already know I don't want to, and then on Tuesday morning I call and say, oh, you're going to have to forgive me.
Right.
How often do we do things like that? Until you recognize your own patterns and that feeling that goes with letting someone down, you're not
Yeah.
going to be able to change it.
Yeah.
So you first have to be aware of it. Then it might even be a course correction of, like, after you notice you've appeased, do the circle back around. Look, you know what? I wanted to talk with you, Julie. I really carried on about how great that idea was in the meeting because I'm excited that you're engaging.
Mm.
But if I'm to be honest, there's a few flaws in it. And the reason I tell you is because I care about your engagement and I think you're a bright mind.
Mm.
But what I understand is that you don't get the strategy. So I want to share with you some of the glitches in it. And I want you to keep coming to me with ideas,
Mm.
but I don't want to mislead you on thinking that it's going to be implemented.
Mm.
Like, it's just the circle back around to get
Yeah.
honest with people.
Yeah. Yeah. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is linked to empowerment. And I think we talked about micromanaging several months ago. And you were saying that some managers will say, well, I have to micromanage them. But then you dig and you realize that it's a lack of empowerment issue. But then when folks are trying to be empowered, whatever those actions are, they get castrated in some way. What more can you say about that?
Well, I think something that you might be talking about as well is, I've kind of categorized leadership dysfunction into 3 categories of best friend, hero, and hands off.
Mm.
And so the best friend leader tries to be the best friend. Like, I just got promoted. We all like each other and I'm going to cover for you. I'm going to like sneak things under the radar. And before long, it starts to really, it causes a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the hero of, like, I love to look good. So I'm going to do it. I'll take over. I'll fix it. I am used to being the high performer. That's why I got promoted. I'm not so great at making you look good because, like, it's about me. Look what I can do. So that becomes sort of a micromanaging right there from that hero perspective. Even the hands off, like, one reason that leaders are hands off is because of that. They don't want to be called a micromanager.
Mm.
So if you're a hero leader and you feel like you got to keep course correcting it, that needs a look in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Are they unclear? Are they not skilled? Is there
Mm-hmm.
priority issues? What's going on to
Mm-hmm.
where you continue to feel that you have to step in and do it? So one of the things that I use practically in my coaching that has helped a lot of people that feel like they struggle with micromanaging comes from several different roots. One root is that the leader is afraid that the person's going to drop the ball or not do it correctly.
Right.
And so it may be a skills issue, it may be a priorities issue, but the fear of the leader, the reason the leader micromanages is they have not gotten good at follow up and they've not gotten good at giving feedback so that they can get it right.
Mm.
So what I tell leaders is to think of yourself as a leader as completer. And what that means is I delegate something to someone, assuming and assuring that they have the skills and that we've got a deadline, and I put it on my calendar 2 weeks before to check in, and I let them know that that's what we're going to be doing.
Right.
We're going to check in. I need regular updates, and what that means is I need you to come to me once a week on Wednesdays to tell me what's
Mm-hmm.
going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to have a check-in 2 weeks before this is due, because I know that if I needed to in 2 weeks, I could step in. But that
Mm-hmm.
way I feel assured that it's getting done versus it's in the dark. I have no idea what's going on. And now I feel this urge to step
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. And this type of delegation, I have got to think, is something that new managers can seek out, right? This type of process.
Yeah, and delegation's hard. It really is difficult because it's one thing to understand a job. It's another thing to set the right expectations and to train, develop, check in. Those are just different skills. So it's not hard to hand something off to someone.
Right.
What's hard is staying out of it and developing the trust that it'll get done like you want it to be done.
Right. Right. In terms of feedback, what do you think the best case scenario is for feedback? Can we ever be too much of a cheerleader? And what's the right balance? You hear about sandwiching a compliment, then something negative in the compliment, but I've got to
Yeah,
think
I'm against that method for
good.
sure. They call that a SH sandwich, if you know what I mean. Like
Uh-huh.
tastes terrible in the middle. I'm really against that kind of feedback because it's very manipulative.
Oh,
I'm going to hook you with, hey, you're awesome. You've done so well. And by the way, here's the bad news, and then by the way, I love you. I just
right.
think that's really not good at all. I think it worked. It used to be recommended back in the day, I guess, because that made you feel better to do it that way. What I
Mhm.
recommend, and I've got a model I call the performance conversation model. In this book, I call it the blueprint.
Mhm.
And what I believe is that it's great to brag on people and tell them they've done a good job and to be more specific, right?
Mhm.
You were very exacting with that, or you made only 2 mistakes. That was amazing.
Mhm.
Or I appreciate the initiative you took, like using character based, like instead of you're awesome, you're so wonderful, like instead
Mm.
of that, very much specific or based on character, like it took a lot of courage to call the client back
Mm.
or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to performance conversations or feedback, I have a process, and in that process are skills that can be used independently because I don't believe everything is a lengthy conversation where you set an appointment. But in the beginning, it might be if you've let things go on for too long.
Mm.
So I wrote this process. I teach it all over the place, and specifically with a franchise system. The owners of franchises, I teach this system to them because once you understand the framework, then the skills stand alone. But if you've let something go on for 5 years, 10 years, you need to set people down and explain what's going to happen. So it starts with the first, it's divided into 3 sections. The first section is leadership clarity. The second section is employee clarity. And the third is the follow-up and accountability. So the
Mhm.
first section is for you as a leader, before you ever talk with anybody, is to get really clear on your intention for the meeting.
Mhm.
Is the intention to show them how wrong they've been and to get onto them and document so you can fire? Or is the intention to get crystal clear on how you can help them, what specifically they need to do, what's happening that shouldn't be happening? Whatever that is, you need to be crystal clear, and you'll know your intention by how you feel. If
Mm.
you still feel angry, you're not ready for the conversation yet.
Mm.
So you need to clear your emotional and mental energy so that you can truly be on board with helping them to get the result instead of being on board to show that they can be fired. Because
Mm.
most of the time, people are documenting for the purpose of firing and setting up a PIP. It's a just
Right.
BS system to show that you tried.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to do all that.
Mhm.
Understand that there's reasons why the performance isn't working. And I give a method to determine how you can, I call it think like a consultant.
Mhm.
In the second part where we're talking employee clarity, where you're saying to the employee after you've done the first part of the system, then you're saying walk me through.
Mm.
And then whatever they say, you're going to listen for clarity,
Mm.
priority, resources, skills, or willingness.
Mhm.
And you're going to hear what the problem is. And there's going to be a lot of distraction. Well, I don't think that's fair. You're only calling on
Mhm.
me. I understand. But the question I'm asking you is, and you
Mhm.
learn how to redirect. And the
Mm.
end of that conversation is about an agreement and a plan that is going to help that person achieve the goals or the skills that they need, and a follow-up, whether that's 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever that is, to follow up and actually see what the result is.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to start with the intention.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds something like, my intention for this conversation is to help you achieve your sales goals. What I've noticed or what I've observed is that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you haven't been showing up for work.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want is for you to understand this is to help you and not to point out your flaws. There's other people I'm talking with too.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way this affects the business is now I've got other team members thinking they can just randomly do X, Y, Z, and then our
Yep.
numbers are down because
Yep.
it's collective.
Yep.
So then you walk through that, my intention, what I've observed, what I want, how this affects the business. Then it's about walk me through what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to listen to them, and then they're going to say, well, I really didn't realize. I mean, when I first started working here before you were the boss, Tuesdays and Thursdays were free time. Of course, so now we know it's clarity, right? It's an issue of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're going to say, well, I really never learned how to document because when I came in, Kim was on pregnancy leave, and you said I would get that time, but I didn't. So I'm struggling. I'm trying to learn. Oh, so now it's a skills issue. We have to figure out what the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
If we make it into a blame game, or I can't wait to fire them, or they think they got one over on me, you've already lost. You're not going to get through it. So the hardest part of this is the emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
I've given the skills and the outline and the process with the understanding that in part 2, that's where it's no longer a science. That is where the only thing you have is to redirect and to figure out which bucket this falls into, because the employee, if they're good, they will deflect, they will talk about the past, they will throw other goals in there, and that's where you have to be really good at really getting right back on track.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not going to be a fit in the end, right?
Yeah, sometimes, but here's the theory, and I think that it works. I've seen it work with many of my clients. The theory is that if in your heart of hearts you are doing everything you can, you should have learned something either about your hiring process or about some information that wasn't forthcoming when this person came on board or when you came on board. And by the time you've done this and you've had a follow-up, it will be a mutual agreement. It won't be a shock. It won't be a surprise. It won't be I wink, wink documented. And, oh, well, by the way, we're laying off. There's not going to be any of this appeasing. It's going to be very clear that this is just, you're a good person. This is a good company. It's truly not the right fit given what we've been through.
Yeah.
And it's not going to feel bad. It's just going to be a fact.
Yeah. Some folks want to be able to collect unemployment. And I think that companies are trying to avoid
that can be a conversation you have as well. And sometimes that's an agreed upon. It's easier to do that sometimes. I think the main piece of this is that the relationship stays somewhat solid, because then you don't have all those questions about lawsuits and whether or not I'm going to get paid. Maybe you're glad to pay them that just to get them out, and you've had the conversation. They realize it was a bad hire. You know what I mean? Or there was some reason. What I've told I've worked with express employment agencies, their franchises, they're at headquarters. Whenever I do this training for that particular group, we laugh and I say, here's the way you can speak to your employee. You can say, the good news is we own a staffing organization. We can help you get another job, right? Like you don't have to fit in here. It doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Yeah.
It means for whatever your life circumstance right now, you're not going to be into sales, right? You've got an elderly mother that's in a nursing home, or you have life circumstances that are going to prevent you from being in the office, which is where you need to be in this particular job. So the good news is we have an employment agency, and you know who's hiring, right? So we can help you get there. So that's kind of funny, because it really doesn't make it personal. We know that you'll work out great somewhere, but like, by the evidence of your attendance, engagement, expertise, willingness to learn, it's very clear that this is not, and I'm trying my best to give you what you need, but it's apparent. Because once people have to get honest with themselves, if they're coming from a place of entitlement, this ends that right here, because you're having accountability.
So I want to talk a little bit more about, well, this will dip into the victim mentality a little bit. Some of the words that I read from your book, which I think are beautiful, positive, healthy growth mindset words, really fostering in people conflict capacity, leadership identity, leadership clarity, emotional integrity, structures, and choice. And then the truth is, very few of us are willing to consider another point of view when we feel threatened, discounted, or violated.
Mm.
And I know that all of chapter 6 is focused on dealing with difficult people. And I mean, I don't know how, I feel like these things are linked, that, working with difficult people, victim mentality. This is another quote: as long as we buy into the victim narrative, we imprison ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
So do you find that folks can be in this state? Awareness is the first step, right? So they might not even be aware of it. Have you found that there are certain ways to kind of awaken or to help people begin to see it?
Yeah, I think, it's sort of, again, it's the mirror effect, right? It's like, I want to share this concept, even though I didn't write about this concept in the book. I wrote about it in my first book. It
Mhm.
changed my life.
Mhm.
The word victim is a little outdated, I guess, because of where we are right now in our world. But
Mhm.
the Karpman drama triangle, have you ever heard of that?
I have not, no.
Okay, so the Karpman drama triangle is a model that was built by psychiatrists back in the 60s or 70s. Anyway, the idea is that when relationships are dysfunctional, you'll see patterns of behavior or orientations, so to speak.
Mhm.
So at the bottom of the triangle is the victim. The
Mhm.
victim does not feel empowered. The victim is not my fault, everybody else's fault. This happens to me, not fair. That's the mindset of the victim, is there are no choices. So the way that you identify victim mentality is the belief that there's no choices and it's everybody else's fault. So a lack of
Okay.
responsibility, absence of choice. In the upper left-hand corner of the triangle is the persecutor. And the persecutor is my way or the highway. I got it figured out. You're the one that's not okay. I'm fine. And so then there's the upper right hand, which is the rescuer, which is let me fix everything. That's the appeaser. That's the let me
Mhm.
fix it. I'm the hero. Like, you poor victim, I see you as helpless and I'm going to be your salvation.
Yeah.
The point here is that there cannot be a victim without a rescuer or a persecutor.
Mm.
So the idea of this model, which I have just, it's a part of my world. It's a part of my life. I've done this for so long. The idea is that fix yourself first. No matter
Mhm.
what kind of victim you're seeing in life, it's up to you to be the responsible leader and not to necessarily label or point out. It's about you not being the rescuer. It's about you not persecuting.
Mhm.
And so if you withdraw from the game no longer exists. So
Mhm.
that's the idea. So disempowerment, that's why I say in the book, you need to see people as the creative force of their own life, whether they
Mhm.
see that or not.
Mhm.
Listen to their story, respect their story, but
Mhm.
help them see their choices. Because if we operate from I had no choice and life is against me, you will never win from that perspective. So it's not good to keep giving the man a fish. You've got to teach the man to fish. Now, with
Mhm.
that said, the man still has to be able to bait the hook and throw out the line.
Sure.
So if
Right.
they're not willing to do that, it doesn't matter. You cannot rescue, you cannot continue to uphold someone that won't do their own inner work. And so
Mhm.
that's the message there in that chapter.
Have you come across environments where leaders have the mentality that the subordinates don't have a choice?
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's agreement there if you think about it,
Hmm.
because the subordinates are staying. They
Yeah.
stay. So there's a collective agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't happen if someone saw their choice.
Mm. Mm.
Just like a bad marriage, you can say, well, I have no other choice.
Right.
There's always other choices, but you
Yeah.
have to see them first, and they may be scary.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't see your choice, I give this example that was in Eckhart Tolle's book, um, The New Earth. I believe that's the book this was in, and I used it in my book. It's the parable of the beggar sitting on a chest of gold, begging everyone else for help.
Mm.
We're all sitting on our own chest of gold. And as long as we look outside of ourselves and expect someone else to make us happy, to make us wealthy, to make us
Mm.
successful, to be fair, as long as we look on the outside, we are forever going to be the beggar sitting on the box of gold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've found sometimes that folks in work environments, their expression to their superiors can be kind of cloaked in defensiveness.
Yes.
Um, what would you say to that? I personally would like leaders to be able to try to see through it, but I also think there needs to be some advice for the subordinate.
Well, for sure. I feel like in some ways I've been a very defensive person. So I have a lot of thoughts on this because defensiveness is a form of self-protection.
Yeah.
So again, that's for leaders, they have to create a safe working environment. And
Yep.
one of the skills I teach is the observable behavior, like to be able to say, well, Mark, I noticed when I brought this up at the meeting, you folded your arms and turned on your cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through what's going on. Did you disagree?
Yeah.
Because the only way someone's going to stop being defensive is to recognize it. And the only way they can recognize it is if we gently show them a mirror.
Okay.
And it's very much on the drama triangle when someone's in denial, which is the part I've added to the drama triangle. In the middle is denial. And when you bring someone out of denial, they immediately become a victim almost always, or a persecutor.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, I noticed that you did this, what they're always going to say, or if you say, look, Mark, I thought that you were sarcastic when I made a suggestion at lunch. Did you disagree? What Mark is going to say is, oh, heck no, I was just joking. I just want you, I'm just joking. I mean, you're so sensitive.
Yeah.
You hear the defense?
Yep.
It's all you.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you had the courage to bring it up, they're saying it's all you. You just are sensitive. That's just the way I joke. The opportunity for the leader is to say, perhaps I am, but when I'm asking X, I need you to be this way. Because once you've told someone what you need from them and they continue to do the opposite, they do it with knowledge.
Yeah. 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 That's fantastic. Fantastic advice. So related, workplace drama, probably most of this falls under workplace drama. So a couple of episodes ago on the podcast, I had a couple of relational therapists. They are actual couples therapists. And it was really cool to talk to them and about the work they do and how it can translate in the work environment. And of course, the conversation ends up around, childhood wounds and trauma that leads to unhealthy behavior patterns. And then sometimes these unhealthy behavior patterns are actually good for business. We have really bullish sales professionals. We have workaholics, our neurosis can be good for business, but they harm people along the way. Right. So I know that you've written about this, and I'm kind of curious about, this is like psychotherapy, right? You're not a psychotherapist, right?
No.
Clearly you're aware of this, right? We're aware that this is what we're actually dealing with in these environments sometimes, right?
Well, we all have wounds, that is
Yeah.
for sure. I'm very interested in all of that. If I had a second career, it would be in the helping therapies of some sort,
Yeah.
whether it be speech therapy or physical therapy or a therapist. I love everything that has to do with human behavior and potential.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's so interesting to me. In the workplace, this is how I frame it. Everything has to go and be in alignment with the organization's missions and vision and values. So if being bullish and being rude is part of that in an environment, you're going to thrive, and so will other people. It'll be expected.
Yeah.
I mean, I just watched something about gaming, the young kids that are gaming and making a fortune because they get sponsorships. It's a very brutish culture. They call each other names, very vulgar. They call each other names. They're rude. They threaten each other. And sometimes it does turn into actual physical, either harm or death. It's a culture that's been created and seemingly is okay in the people that have collectively agreed to be in that culture.
Okay.
But as a leadership team, you have to decide what you want your culture to be. And is that behavior of that individual, is it hurting the team? Is it hurting your reputation? Does it go along with your brand? Are you making exceptions? So that's the first place you have to start with these kinds of things, because one person may thrive in one type of organization and not in another, and that will be a values clash. So you have to decide, like, what are the values? Do we live those? Do we embody those? And then when it comes to the personal part of that, when someone says something like, well, look, I just want to be authentically me. I just want to be authentic. That's just how I am. After all, I'm a red on this kind of personality test, and I'm a disc, and I'm an INTJ, and I'm a owl, I'm a shark, whatever it is that you are, right? I'm a Virgo with a moon rising in Scorpio.
Yes.
Whatever it is that you are, like, this is my comeback.
Yeah.
Is that who you want to be? Because if it's not who you want to be, and if you haven't thought about that, then it's harming you. And so to be authentic, the reality is, and this includes me, it does not exclude anybody. Every single one of us has a wounded child, a hurt person, a damaged something that was traumatic, and we can be authentic to that and never heal it, or we can be authentic to the highest version of ourselves and we can learn to course correct.
Yeah.
So it's really about who do you want to be and authentic to what.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's taking some time to think about that, which I'd suggest. I don't know that a lot of people do that. And around toxicity and this term that some are saying was maybe overused. How would you define a toxic environment?
I've never really defined that in my work. And I
Okay.
guess I just have thought about negativity when I think of toxic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're not connected.
Mm,
We're at each other's, there's no, you got my back, I got your back. There's lack of teamwork. I think it depends on the organization. How would you define it?
yeah.
But
Okay.
when we say that word, we generally think we're not happy there.
Yeah.
It's not about relationships. It's only about the bottom line, or it's only
Right.
about the politics. So that's generally when we're using that word, we're meaning that we're not happy there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so again, I think that has to do with culture. It has to do with stated values versus lived values.
Mm-hmm.
If the values are our top value is compassion. Let's say you're a healthcare organization. Our top value is compassion. And yet in the hallways, we've got the saying that the nurse here will eat their young. Well, then
Yeah.
you're not about compassion,
Right.
because you can't be compassionate in one area only. It's a value.
Right.
It has to filter through everything you do.
Have you worked with organizations where you've seen this incongruence and kind of pointed it
Absolutely.
out? And I mean, how does an organization work towards congruence?
Well, that is it has to be from the top. I know that you can change things in one department, that's for sure. You got a really good leader. If you've got a little bit of a siloed organization, one leader can, or one group of people that decide, but it does take leadership. I mean, we want to pretend like it can start at the bottom and that one influencer, but it's very rare.
Mm,
And so it does have to be a decision, and a
mm,
decision to look deeply at what we mean by these values versus it just looks really good on the website.
right.
We're healthcare, so we've got to say dignity and compassion.
Right.
And so if it is dignity and compassion, where do we lack dignity? Where do we mess up? What does that mean? What's the essence of that word, and how do we show up in everything we do with that value? Because you can know about it on a test, you can check the list, but if it's not lived, it's not a value.
Mm-hmm. And does it always take some kind of financial or egregious public shaming type of event to get leadership to change? Or are there times when it doesn't have to come to that?
I don't know, because I have not done the research, but
Mm,
I would say that especially in a small company, it wouldn't have to be that way.
mm-hmm.
I would say for sure, the more power you have, whether you're a small business or a medium enterprise, it can truly come from just the greatness and the awareness of the top leadership team or a leader. I think it can come from that, because that person will be so altruistic or so values driven based on maybe some kind of experience of trauma,
Yeah.
or some kind of experience of working for an organization where they said never again. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it has to come. In fact, I think if it does come from that other, it's probably not real.
Mm, right.
If it's only coming because you got punished, then it's still smoke and mirrors, in my opinion.
Yeah. We talked in a previous conversation around some of the work that you do. You'll do a situation analysis before you really engage with a client, or that this is the best way
Yeah.
for you to get started with them. And in that conversation, you had said at one point that you present it, and sometimes they'll say, well, wait, we can't say that. Like we can't have that on paper. Like you've clearly laid out what the issue is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's something that can't really be stated as clearly as that. There's some need to protect or keep some things unsaid. What could you say about that?
That's a little bit, it's two-pronged, okay? So one is they've got an ulterior motive, and number two is I haven't learned the politics to write it in a way that's acceptable.
Got it.
Okay, so it's like, one is I've said it because they absolutely said it's Jessica's fault, and this is what Jessica is doing, but instead the incongruity is, but we're going to have this big retreat for everybody. Well, no, you need me to work with Jessica, and you need me to work with you because you're her boss.
Yeah.
Right. So like, that's a problem right there, right? You're
Right.
Jessica's boss. So why, you know what I'm saying? So it's got to be you too. It's not just Jessica.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's part of the problem. And the other part of it is, again, being very aware of the politics
Yeah.
and how this is going to go before a board of directors, or this is
Yeah.
going to be in the notes. So you do have to be mindful. And there was sometimes in my own honesty of like, hey, Jessica's a bad leader. You want Jessica fixed. If I put that in the situation analysis, you're going to be aghast, even though that's what you just told me on a recorded
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
Right. But what I have learned is that with a situation, it's situation analysis is part of leadership clarity. And most organizations, most individuals do not have that.
Mm.
And so if you cannot effectively say what's happening that should not be happening, or what's not happening that should be, then
Yeah.
you're trying to create an initiative off of very faulty information.
Yeah. I mean, I see this happen all the time. And you had also talked about, let's have a workshop. We'll have a workshop and we'll fix the issue. And it's like, these are like big issues, no one thing
Right.
is going to fix this much larger. And again, this quickness to, the executive group has figured out in a few minutes what the issue is, and they're going to find the workshop to fix it. And they could be completely wrong. Right.
Well, and two, the funny part is, okay, we've got an X amount of budget. It has to happen in July. We want this, and here's our $1 million problem, but we only have this much to fix it. We were going to tell you what to do. And we're going to tell you that we also want personality studies because that's going to help everybody get along. Well, maybe it will, and maybe it won't.
Yeah.
People do like those things, but this is the sarcastic part of me. I've said before, just get a clown and a pizza party. It's going to be better than what I can do for you.
Right.
Given your budget, given what you think is going to work. And so the best thing that leaders can do when they're seeking help is to stay a little bit curious and to not think you have all of the answer. And in fact, even if I have a situation analysis, it's a real likelihood that as I start working, whether I'm working with one small group of people or one leader, it's probably pretty likely that I'm going to unravel some other things too. So the hope is that we've got a timeline, we've got a budget, we got to fix this. But the reality is it's going to take decisions from the top to do that. And if you're not willing and prepared to invest in the time and the resources and the hearing the bad news that you didn't want to hear, if you're not willing for that, then all the things you think are going to fix it won't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, you said stay curious, and I don't know if you're familiar with the show Undercover Boss. Where
Yes, I used to watch it.
It's so fun for me. I mean, I waited tables for a long time, and I feel like several of the episodes have focused on restaurants, and it's just so true often, right, that the front lines have all these brilliant ideas, and no one's even asking them. And sometimes they might bring it up to their immediate manager, but who knows where it goes from there. But why do you think, leaders don't ask? Does it occur to them, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're just so busy with everything else they've got to do that it's that appeasing kind of thing, right? I've got this idea, but what I don't realize is the idea would be X amount of investment and the budget's already been spent. Like there's so many variables about why they don't ask. And truly, at the mid-level, they're not as empowered anyway. Right. And truly, they don't want to look bad to their boss. So they're not going to be the carrier of that information.
Right.
I mean, they're not going to give that. If they do come up with the idea and think it's good, they're going to take the idea for themselves.
Yeah. Right. Which, never feels great, I'm sure. This idea, one of the premises behind Work Dope, this podcast, is this fundamental question or need for humans, the question of being valued. And I am curious to your opinion as to what you feel the employer's role is in this in terms of valuing employees, and what should an employee expect from an employer when it comes to this?
You mean about giving ideas? Is that what you mean?
I've heard from many people in work environments that they want to be valued at work. And they might leave work if they don't feel they're being valued.
Yeah.
And me coming from now through some amount of evolution, which is continuing, I really am understanding more and more that the value is more of an intrinsic, like I'm not sure what I should expect from a boss. So what do you
I think it's an honest conversation really about what makes you feel like, what gives you value. Like, in other words, I as an employee can't expect to get all my sense of value from you, because that's the victim mentality. Right. I have to somehow enjoy what I do and feel appreciated, and I have to understand how it contributes to the whole.
Right.
So I think that what employers owe is a conversation about, let me understand you. What is it
Hmm.
that's going to make you, like, is it about growth? Is it
Yeah.
about autonomy? Is it about excellence, like recognition? Like, what is it for you and what's our culture?
Hmm.
Like, in other words, clear expectations.
Hmm.
Here's how we reward, here's how we operate.
Hmm.
It's really getting to know people.
Yeah.
And because to me, I find value in a lot of things I do that I don't get a lot of acknowledgement for.
Right.
But I do feel excited and acknowledged if I have a live LinkedIn and,
Yeah.
let's say 700 or 800 people signed up. Let's say
Yeah.
50 actually showed up. And out of those 50, I got 12 shares.
Yeah.
I feel valued
Yeah.
because I was excited that someone got enough value to share it.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
if I have an unrealistic expectation that all 700 people from across the globe are going to shut down on the day I do a live when it's recorded, and if
Yeah.
I expect them all to share it and to tell me how great I am, I'm going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
So part of it's realistic expectations, and
Yeah.
you have agreed to work for a paycheck, so that should be part of it.
Hmm.
But what is it that makes you feel valued? Is it an opportunity to grow? If you don't know yourself, you
Right.
can point the finger at the employer all day long. But if
Yeah.
you know yourself and say, I want to grow, I want to get feedback, once a month, twice a month, I want a one-on-one. If you kind of know what it is that makes you feel that, then that's a
Right.
conversation.
Right. Yeah. And what you said is important too, that knowing how what you do affects the entire organization, knowing what that contribution is. My husband is Navy, he was in the Navy, and he talks about how you got appreciation for every person on that ship. Everyone was required in order to make that organization run, if you will. And I feel that that is definitely part of the value prop.
And that comes in conversation too. Like, as you
Yeah.
were speaking, I got to thinking about, you know, the long-term care organizations, how it takes so much to make it all work, and
Yeah.
as dysfunctional as they can be.
Yeah.
You've got the people in house cleaning that if it wasn't for them, that place would smell terrible.
Yeah.
And I think the appreciation has to come out formally in some way
Yeah.
to connect the dots
Yeah.
of, like, this made our lives easier because you did this when everybody was at lunch, right?
Yep.
You were able to get the soiled clothing, and you were
Yeah.
able to, when people start to understand the impact it has on other people, that's what feels pretty good.
Right.
And that creates more engagement. And I think just collectively, if we appreciate each other, or at the colleague level, and then people above us, people below us, whatever
Yep.
they are on the chain, on the ladder, just to be able to acknowledge how much that meant to have that foundation or that support, like,
Yep.
it's just a civility and courtesy really
Yep.
goes a long way.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask, with all of the experience and the insight that you bring, if you had or have a niece or a nephew entering the workforce, would you have advice, and what would it be like in terms of them navigating their first corporate environment?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say be curious and learn the culture.
Hmm.
I would say observe and find out who makes decisions, and find out how people think, and, like, keep your mouth shut. Really,
Right.
I
For a
would say,
while.
like, don't be too entitled or opinionated.
Right.
My best advice would be, build relationships and take initiative.
Mm.
If you take initiative by helping other people and showing that you are curious enough to help out, or that, like, in other words, I've seen this a lot, so this is really front and center on my mind. Initiative to me means, if there's a problem and someone comes to me with a problem, I don't just say, oh, I'm so sorry, that's not what I do, I only work
Right.
on these days. But
Right.
I say, I don't know, because I don't do that, but I know someone I can ask. And
Yes.
then when I go ask, I also follow up
Yeah.
with that person to say,
Yeah.
I've told this person, I'm going to give you their
Yeah.
information. Like, that to me is initiative. If you do that, you will go far.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Great advice. Yeah. And I do think sometimes there are opportunities. I would say take opportunity too. If
Yes.
there are things that are offered and you might feel like you're not experienced enough, you haven't been around long enough. If they're offering it to you, they either see something in you, or they just know that your level of experience is okay. And sometimes I see people hesitate a little bit when that engagement could lend itself to experiences that you
Well,
wouldn't
it could,
apply.
and I would also say, like, get really clear and ask the right questions. Like, could I have a trial period? Could I
Yeah.
have a beta period to where
Mm.
if I don't like it, I can go back? Or
Yeah.
what kind of support and mentoring will I get? My fear is that I might mess up and, like get reassured, get the
Mhm.
reassurance that you need to be able to
Mhm.
take that leap and know that
Mhm.
you're going to be supported. I think the
Mhm.
fear is being set up for failure, which is a valid fear.
Yeah. Yeah, something I did at some point in my career was I asked for the one-on-ones with my boss. And
Mhm.
is that something you would recommend? I mean, it
I
worked for me.
do.
Yeah,
Yes, and I think bosses should just do it.
I know, but they
Um,
don't always.
they started this when I was, working in a factory. I loved it, and I mean,
Yeah.
I was just a factory worker. Do we really need a one-on-one? No, but it gave us a relationship with the
Yeah.
boss.
Right.
And so whether it's once a month, depending on how many
Yep.
people you've got under you, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. And it makes small corrections, if you will, or feedback so much easier if you've just got a relationship and you're not only bringing things up in a 6 month or a 12-month review. I mean,
Yeah.
just really makes it adds grease. I think it just
It
makes
does
everything a little
because
easier.
if you think about it, if I've got a good relationship with my boss, and let's say on the one-on-one, he's just like, "What's important to you right now? Is there anything concerning you?"
Right.
And there could be a little coaching, like if I'm gossiping about someone else, maybe the boss says, "Well, have you talked with her about this?"
Hmm.
The boss coaches you a little bit instead of
Hmm.
rescues. Let me go make sure that that doesn't
Right.
happen anymore, right? The boss doesn't get drawn
Right.
into the game.
Yeah.
But let's say the boss gets to know you, then the next time you mess up and the boss says, "Hey, I just noticed X. Would you be willing to do Y?" Like you've got the relationship. So you don't
Yeah.
have to have a long drawn out conversation because you're already meeting all the time
Yeah.
and you like your boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. My last question is one that I like to ask everyone, and it's around satisfying work. And you kind of alluded to it already when you're describing your LinkedIn learning and then things that you do that maybe no one recognizes. But now, and even back when you were in a factory worker, like what characterized the most satisfying work for you?
I'm a creative person. So for me, the ability and factory work definitely was not creative. So I didn't find a lot of satisfaction there.
Hmm.
But I'm a creative person. So I like an area where I can be creative, think deeply, share knowledge. So I like to help people get better at things and understand things. And
Hmm.
it's fascinating to me how the human brain works and what motivates people. And things that I've overcome. So anything like that is going to be really meaningful for me if
Hmm.
I'm helping someone and if I'm growing and
Hmm.
being able to think deeply. So for me, that's what it is. For someone else, it might be they like speed, they like excitement, they like the
Hmm.
thrill, the risk.
Right.
And so it's really know yourself. What is it
Hmm.
for you that makes you excited and feel
Hmm.
jazzed about waking up and starting the day?
Right. In this exchange I had with a previous guest, I had asked, can we expect that at the outset, like when we're 23 or whatever it is that we enter the workforce officially or unofficially? How soon is it before we can get to the point where we're looking forward to so many aspects of our day? Like, is there some amount of paying one's dues?
Well, that's debatable, I guess,
Hmm.
depending on how smart you are and what kind of benefits if you grew up around parents that were entrepreneurs, you're on a yacht while someone else is on a raft. Right? So I mean, it depends on what boat you're on.
Yeah.
I think it has to be somewhat intrinsic.
Hmm.
I think it has to be know yourself and make a game out of it. I
Hmm.
remember when I was really young in high school and was working at a restaurant, and oh, I hated to bus tables. I just hated
Hmm.
it. Just hated to go by and clean tables. And I remember complaining about it. I was probably 15, 14 or 15. And there was an older guy that worked there that was really, I guess he could be sort of a mentor at that point in my life, but he was like, you got to make a game out of it. He said, you got to say, this is the greatest thing. How fast can I do this one? And like, that's what I mean about
Yeah.
intrinsically. At a certain point, whenever I was scared to jump, I said, well, someone's got to make cheese. Maybe that's me. Like I just tried to find what's the game,
Yeah.
what's the best I can do today?
Yeah.
Like, what can I work on for myself? Like there's
Right.
this one person that irritates me. So can I get through the day and be kind to them? That was a success. So I think
Right.
you've got to find a way to motivate yourself. And
Yeah.
in the early 20s and whatnot, I know people give young people a bad rap,
Yeah.
but we were young too. And so
Yeah.
we always stand on the shoulders of whoever came before us.
Hmm.
I would say really try to watch the the state of entitlement. Just
Mm.
try to be a little more humble and to realize that you're young and
Mhm.
that there will always be people faster, better, and further than you,
Mhm.
and come from a place of service and intention and
Mhm.
integrity. If you'll come from that place versus what does the world owe me? And after all, I'm really fast on this and that. I'm all that in a bag of chips. If you come from that place, you're going to struggle well
Yeah.
into your 40s. If
Yeah.
you come from a place of, I'm thrilled that I'm young, I've got a lot to offer, but I've got a lot to learn too. And like, I've got a lot to offer the boomers that are still in the workforce, and they've got a lot of wisdom to share with me. If you'll come from a unified sort of stance, I think
Yeah.
you'll get a lot further than to be
Yeah.
kind of superior because you're young
Yeah.
or think that you're owed something because you're young.
Right. And I have some hope around this, that as folks are looking more towards diversity and inclusion, that this is part of diversity and inclusion, that we need to be open to what each generation
Yes.
brings. And I'm hopeful, like I said, and I've been at the same organization for a very long time. So I've seen the batches of 23-year-olds year after year after year. And I don't know if I know I've changed, but I feel like I'm noticing change on their part too, and a greater openness towards the expertise of everyone in the
I hope
organization.
so.
So
And
I am hopeful.
I love to be around young people and I
Hmm.
enjoy them a lot. I enjoy
Hmm.
the idealism. I enjoy sometimes the confidence that really should not be there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like I'll
It's
see
like,
that.
good for you.
I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, when did I do that? Because I know that I
Yeah.
did it. Like I was
Sure.
confident. I would say I'm great at that. I was like a C minus at best, right?
Right.
So I'm seeing those things. I enjoy young people a lot. I enjoy the fun, the creativity, the what's before them. The whole world is before them.
Yeah.
I
Right.
really enjoy all ages. And I often say for all of these values that we have, we can take those values right from where we are. Take, for example, inclusion.
Hmm.
Well, you know what? If you've got an elderly grandmother in the rest home, she needs to be included. She's still in your family.
Right.
Like, don't think that you have to be in some huge diverse workforce to experience inclusion. Yes,
Right.
create it, attract it, but in your
Right.
own family, can you do it there too? Because it's a value. It's not a one-time event, you
Right.
know?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
I was speaking from my own experience, and I've got young
Yeah.
people that are all about that stuff, but they won't go see their elderly grandmother at the
Yeah.
hospital. So you know what? Live it in every area of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that has definitely been a theme of several of my most recent episodes. Is this just choosing that you're going to walk in that service mindset, the compassion mindset, even when confronted with people you might not want to interact with. How can you continue to show up to be who, the better parts of yourself most of the time? I think that, sometimes the energy just isn't there.
Well, here's something I've learned just to add some humor. As you work on yourself and you do what I call your inner journey, that I talk a lot about the inner work, the inner game in this book. As you do more of that, you'll be less offended and less
Yeah.
caught off guard and less appalled.
Yeah.
You'll just be less. None of
Yeah.
that will be. It'll kind of wash through you, and you'll
Yeah.
actually. I found myself the other day. There's someone that's in my family that I used to just feel like, oh, I can't take it. You
Yeah.
know, the ignorance and the like.
Right.
I felt judgmental.
Yep.
And like the last time I was around, when I heard some of the things that were coming out of this person's mouth, I was giggling, and I actually caught it on video because I thought it was so funny. And
Mm.
my husband was just furious. He's like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "Oh, you know what? That's so funny." Because used to, I was the only one that like got offended or angry or just thought they
Mm.
were ridiculous and didn't have their facts. I don't know, like you'll just find humor.
Hmm.
You won't be so quick to make someone the evil
Right.
the persecutor. Like you'll just kind of go, wow,
Right.
that's an interesting take. So once you work on yourself more, you're
Yeah.
just easier to get along with.
Right. Right. And I feel that there's a lot of energy freed up in that too. So
A lot.
it's just a better way to walk through life. So yeah, fantastic. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation, Marlene. So
Too.
rich. So where can folks find you?
Well, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, again, it's Marlene Chism, or you can connect with me and say that you met me here on this podcast.
Mhm.
Or my website is marlenechism.com, MarleneChism.com. And then From Conflict to Courage is on Amazon.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you again. And hopefully we'll talk soon. Bye bye, Marlene.
Yes, bye bye.
There you have it. This episode is in the books. I want to mention again that a lengthy excerpt from Marlene's book, From Conflict to Courage, is at her website. Take a look. I look forward to getting my hands on the full copy very, very soon. And as always, please send any comments or messages my way. Of course, comment on the platform that you're listening to this podcast on. Share it with friends if you think it would be helpful for them too. You can send me a note or a recorded message at linda@workdopepod.com. That's linda@workdopepod.com. Until next time, this is Linda Stacy signing off for Work Dope. Bye-bye.